And welcome back to the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Hall of Fame wrestling writer, broadcaster, and announcer Jason Bryant. Today on the show, we're going to be talking with Ron Lang, author of Matt Return. You may have seen the reviews in Amateur Wrestling News. He's got some podcasts out there. But before we bring Ron on, I want to give you a primer on what we're talking about. This is the book, Matt Return. We're going to go into the educational system of it, the foundations of it, and talk with Ron. But I want to preface it with this before we bring Ron on. Wrestling is the first and oldest sport known to mankind. It has survived for centuries and is still thriving in America today. Wrestling is the athletic base for several mixed martial arts and many other professional athletes. Wrestling will inevitably strengthen the body and fortify the mind. The sport has laid a foundation of success for business executives, Hollywood actors, and community leaders. From Olympic gold medalists to young beginners, Matt Return delivers intriguing stories of people from each of the 50 states who utilize wrestling to build a path to greatness. The value of wrestling is the universal manifestation of personal growth. Matt Return is the resurgence of amateur wrestling in the United States and how the sport is developing more Americans to be champions in life. That is on the back jacket of the book, Ron. Well written. I loved. I loved. I wanted to start the show with that because I think that the one, it's not just an embodiment of what you've written here, but it's also a great embodiment of the sport. So one, welcome to the program, and two, that's just the way to start, man. I mean, it's on the back, but that's the way to start.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. And when you started reading, I was thinking, hey, that sounds familiar. So,
I hope it does. So first things first, Ron Lang. The question is like, who are you, and why did you want to write a book about wrestling?
well, I'm a football coach for a long, long time, over 20 years, college and high school football in the state of Texas. And um, but wrestling, I wrestled in high school. Tried to start junior high, broke my leg before I was ever able to get on the mat for a match. But uh, wrestling left an indelible mark on my life that still is showing me lessons today, providing me benefits to this day, and also have coached the sport uh, here in the state of Texas. When I got out of college coaching, got into high school, I started two wrestling programs here in the state of Texas at the high school level, and I just know the benefit of the sport. As you can tell, I mean, I obviously played football, coached football, I'm a big football guy, but to me, wrestling is the most transformative thing you can do outside of, say, military or religion. But um, it's the most transformative sport there is in the world. Always has been, and I don't see that changing. And so I wanted to help promote the sport, talk about some of the changes that has happened for others. And to be honest with you, I've just always felt like if someone tried the sport of wrestling without through a season without quitting, whether it be one season, 2 seasons, or 10 seasons, there will be a time in their life where they're able to overcome something or they're able to accomplish something, and they'll look back and they'll realize much of what's given them the strength and the courage and the attributes to do those things comes from wrestling. So I just find it so important for people to be able to learn these attributes. Wrestling is, like I said, the most transformative sport there is. And so, what I wanted to do is write a book that talks about the attributes of wrestling, teaches a little bit about wrestling, some of the history, but also teach about what's out there. All 50 states are represented. There is a strong wrestling community in each state, and I wanted people to realize that and see that there is opportunity. So.
We talk about the transformative motion. A lot of people, when they think Texas, of course, they think high school football, and high school football is king. I mean, you just look at some of the videos and pictures out there of the giant high school football stadiums that are bigger than college stadiums. A lot of places, like I know Allen, for example, is one of those ones that gets thrown around on social media quite a bit. Football is life in Texas as a high school sport. I mean, we've got, of course, we can joke about varsity blues and whatnot, but Friday Night Lights, that type of thing. But you've lived it down there. So when it comes to wrestling, people always assume, they hear, okay, Texas should be massively good at wrestling because it's such a big football state, and wrestling makes you a better football player. When you got down there, what was that conversation like? And was there any convincing to your peers to be like, we need to give this wrestling thing a shot?
No doubt at all. Actually, one of the schools that I was coaching at was a military school, and I mean that's perfect, right? To bring perfect atmosphere and environment to bring wrestling into. And I talked with them for it was a couple of years. What really set it over the top is that there was a guy named Jesus Wilson who was an Olympian defector from Cuba. Actually, there's a match online with him and Brands wrestling in the trials.
There's an iconic
Yep.
instance with him and Brands that that
Yes.
it's made wrestling lore with Jesus Wilson.
Yeah, so Jesus Wilson shows up, and I'm not sure how they got connected, but the administration there at the school finally relented, and that's where we were able to start. And not to be a name dropper, but we were in a private league then. And so at the time, we were wrestling against Bishop Lynch out of Dallas that had the Silvers and some good wrestlers, but also Kenny Monday was a big part of that program at the time. So, we did pretty well. We sent many guys to state, had a couple runner ups in our first year. So, I was proud just to get that program started. But you mentioned the football aspect, just a public school, which one of the schools I coached at near Austin, uh, they they bucked at it also. But there were some guys wrestling at a club from their school. They kind of banded together. The parents came together and things like that. I do think it should be bigger in Texas. We all know the with some football coaches, right? The rivalry there, the reluctance of football coaches and things like that. I do touch on it in a book about how that's really a misnomer. That I mean, there's so many football coaches that are famous, well known, very accomplished that they look for wrestlers. They love. I mean, obviously, we all know Sean McDermott with the Buffalo Bills right now. I mean, he was a two-time prep national champion. So there's so many things out there that disprove that it hurts you in football. It really helps you. But the other thing is about Texas. I will say, I do want to say that it was one of the first states to adopt women's wrestling too. So I think that's pretty important.
That is one of the topics. I was just recently on a show with Mike Mal from The Athlete, and we were talking about athlete retention, thing at the high school level. So being in that high school age, in that high school level, what has been kind of the enticement, and I'm going to lead this into the book, of getting a kid out for the first time and then getting them that light bulb goes off and they fall in love with the sport, but also making it to one where it's a tough sport. If they go through that season, you've got to get them through the season. I don't believe every kid is born tough. They have to learn that and develop that. But what in your mind takes a kid from a first-time kid to put them in a position where they will be interested in what you've written about learning about the sport even more than just beyond what's in their district or in their section?
Absolutely. I think a big part of it is let's not change who we are. I mean, what we are as a sport. We don't need to change who we are, and we don't need to try to be anyone else, right? At the end of the day, some people are not going to. Like, I tried wrestling in 8th grade because I was cut from the basketball team. Had a friend invite me out. I said, "Hey, that sounds like fun. I'm a physical guy. Let's get after it." Ended up breaking my leg. I mean, I'm not going out like that, right?
I don't
I'm
mean to
really
laugh
going to
at that,
try
but
this.
yeah, that's this, the origin stories are always very unique.
Yeah. Well, and I think the thing about it was, I could have been one, and it's not even about me. Somebody could have gone out, broken their leg, and said, "This is not for me." I get it, and that's nothing wrong with that. But what we need to do is just, I feel like we need to open the doors for more people to give it a try. And those that it fits, and we'll be surprised by the ones that it really does fit and they just love it, right? But those that it fits, they will stick with it, and they will love it. I think a good example, I mean, to bring up women's wrestling again, right? We've given them opportunities, and these girls have come in and said, "Okay, now that I can wrestle against other females, I want to try it." And what have we found out? They have fallen in love with it. And I think that that's the greatest thing. So for me, this book is all about a high school coach or a club coach. What they go up to Susie or Johnny or mom and dad and say, "You know what? You always ask me why would I even try wrestling?" The coach can say, "You know what? Here's Matt Return. Read any chapter out of this book or any story out of this book and tell me why you wouldn't try wrestling." And for me, that's the important thing, is if we can get people to just come out and try it, see what it's about, especially if they're younger kids, they fall in love with it. Wonderful. We're adding numbers to it. they can work on, on their craft. If they don't, then they can play basketball or soccer, and that's okay. I mean, it's okay for people to be different, right? And the days of, oh, because basketball is such a big rivalry, or it's the same time period as the wrestling season. It seemed like there was, when I was in school anyway, that almost you're an inherent hatred, or you're supposed
Hmm.
to hate them, right? No, it's okay. Play basketball. We're going to wrestle. We want more people to come out for wrestling, and I think that's the thing, is let's not change who we are. We are the most transformative thing there is. It is a wonderful sport. It's not for everyone, and that's okay. But the more that we can give people the opportunity to experience it for themselves, I think that's where the growth happens.
It just reminds me of the Abercrombie and Fitch shirts that were circulating in the late '90s, and it said "Wrestling: What Men Do During Boys Basketball Season." And of course, that always went over well when you're walking across campus wearing those things, especially in college. Now, you talk about again making it an experience, an opportunity, getting more kids out. We want to talk about your opportunity in developing this book. Now, this is your fourth book, so let's talk a little bit about putting pen to paper and writing books. What your other three books have been? Obviously, they're not wrestling books, but what drove you to write those? What were those about?
So I actually began writing for my mom. I used to tell her, you've heard kids say the darndest things. So there was, I used to latch on to when adults say things that were incorrect. Like, for instance, an ovulating fan versus an oscillating fan. Uh, so they say silly things like that. I used to tell my mom; she would get a kick out of it. But I would not remember them, so I would write them down so that I didn't miss the opportunity to tell my mom. And when she got sick, I went to help her and support her. And she told me one day, she said, I wish you would put that in book form and publish it. Those are so funny. People will get a kick out of it. So, in honor of my mom, when she passed, I wrote my first book called Relative Genius. And it's really just a silly book about the funny things that people say and adults say. From there, I was working out one day. I was going to do a book on the Southeastern Conference, which I did do. It's called A Season of Homecomings. But I was working out in preparation for that book, and stories just kept popping into my mind about people that I felt were a success. So I wrote the book Unveiling Success, um, about them, because to me, success is not money and fame. Those are fleeting things, and they're not lasting. To me, success is being happy with who you are and what you're doing and the impact you make. Um, and people kept popping in my mind about how they're successful. So I wrote the book Unveiling Success. This was not planned to be my fourth book. I had another plan that I'm working on now. But so what happened was I had opportunities to do some coaching at the US Open and some other places. And I said, you know what? The other project was being paused. I said, this is the time really to focus on wrestling. So I'm at the US Open a couple of years in a row, has some success out there. And I said, and I'm meeting some people that maybe I hadn't met previously. I said, this is the time to do this. And I always knew I wanted to do something to help the sport, promote the sport. And I said, I think this is a calling right now. This is the time to do this.
As in full disclosure, Ron sent me the book back before April. I started on it as I was on my way to the World Championships, and I say this, and I got bookshelves. I see a wrestling book, I'm gonna pick it up. I'm gonna have it. If somebody doesn't send it to me to give it a shot, read it. I'll get to it. Trust me. I know people are out there going, "Why haven't you read my book yet?" I'll get to it. I'm just slow because I've got probably 50 to 60 on in my bookcase right now, but to the point is this: when I first started reading it, the first thing is when I started getting to the chapters and the stories, and you outline, you've got stories from all 50 states. It started reminding me a little bit about Matt Snacks, which is a book Jack Spates wrote. I don't even know when. I remember reading it, and that was more of like, it was a really small book, but it was just anecdotes and stories from wrestling people. I remember turning the page like, "Hey, there's Lee Pritz," or "Hey, there's so and so." And as I was a learning fan, didn't know a lot of this stuff when I first read it. So now I'm going back in time. thinking of, am I the 17, 18-year-old kid that's really involved in wrestling, or even the college freshman or sophomore? I think that's when I read Matt Snacks, that's going to learn something from this. And that's what I loved about it is, and you alluded to it before we started talking, is it's chapter based. The chapters are broken up in stories where you can pick it up. It's for lack of a better term, it's also a really good bathroom book too, because you could just pick up, you can pick it up at a different spot, learn something new. It's not chronological in terms of the storytelling. So it's really approachable. It's really accessible. And again, for somebody like me who lives, eats, and breathes wrestling all the time, it takes a lot for me to be like, oh, I will obviously appreciate the effort of some of these things, but I'll sit to be like, yeah, that's good. That's good. The recommendations, I can't recommend everything that comes through. This is one I recommend to everybody, even the junkie. You're going to sit there and be like, I don't need to know anything more. I know everything I need to know. I learned something from this book. So that's also my little sales pitch for you, my testimonial, if you will. One thing that I was really interested in is when it came time to put pen to paper and collect these interviews, because I've done countless interviews over my career, and I've often thought about writing them down and putting them in a book. I transcribe a lot of my podcasts and have the scripts. I'm like, what am I going to eventually do with this? How did you decide to say, I want to talk to everybody, somebody from all 50 states? How does that idea come, and how do you go about tracking these people down?
So it just stemmed. It all stemmed from, like I was saying, wanted to do something that would promote the sport, and I felt like, I don't want to just promote the sport in the Northeast or the Southwest or certain regions. I think the wrestling in our country overall should be promoted, and so that's where the whole 50 states came from. And I had different contacts. Of course, at the U.S. Open, if you don't have contacts in states, that's a good place to start. You can always find someone from every state, right? So, I've been to Folk Style National, some other tournaments, and so the contacts that I didn't have or didn't have connections to certain people, I would talk to different folks from the state, kind of get their mindset on, hey, who's the leading club or who's the leading coach, any good stories that you know of. And it would progress from there. Then it actually progressed to multiple stories from each state, because, how do you choose just one? It's almost like, who's your favorite child, right? So I tried to limit it and at least keep it pretty much comparable. But the whole idea stemmed from really promoting wrestling, and then also showing that there is a strong wrestling community in each state, right? It may not be in every corner of the state, which is what we hope to eventually get to, right? But there is a strong wrestling community. And I wanted people that picked up the book to say, hey, that's my state. I didn't even realize that wrestling is either popular here or that there's a committed group to wrestling, right? And so that's really what I was wanting to do, is not just promote the sport, but to get people to understand, hey, it's in my sport and there is a dedicated community there, so that me, myself, let's say, I won't single out any state, but in my state, I could say, okay, I'm interested in wrestling. Here's someone that I can contact and reach out to and maybe get some more information. Similarly to what I did with the book, right? So if I didn't have many contacts in a certain state, I'd reach out and I would talk with them. Hey, maybe who should I talk with, or who are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on teams, coaches, good stories in the state? The same way that people pick up my book, they can read about it and say, hey, such and such is here in this town or this state. In our state, I'm going to reach out to them because maybe they know, they're 3 hours away from me, but maybe they know a club that I can send my child to. So
I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. I know you said you didn't want to single out anybody, but there's 3 states that are coming to mind that I want to ask you about.
Okay.
Let's start high up on the alphabet. Let's go with Alaska. Where's the discovery with what's going on in Alaska? Because I have a buddy of mine that coaches up there at West Valley High School. He wrestled at Old Dominion with us, and it was like, Kalen Baxter's his name, and he's, the stories that him and his family have up there are really cool. And then I go through and it's like, oh, okay, there's another cool Alaska story that I'm discovering. How do you go about tracking down the Alaska? What did you find out interesting about the Alaska story? Because obviously I find the Michaela Hutchison, the whole Hutchison family, pretty
Mhm.
engaging. She was, of course, that first girl to win a state title against the boys. Then they also have their seasons over in December, and the sheer vastness of the state lends itself to a lot of possibilities. What did you find intriguing about your Alaska research?
It confirms some of the things about the state itself, about the travel. Like you and I, right? We can get in the car and we can drive to a location. That's not always the case for them. I mean, I heard a story that I allude to in the book, but I don't really tell about the story because I wasn't able to confirm some of the details. But there was a story about a kid coming to the state tournament with his Iditarod team or with his dogs, dog sled, and they come in, he comes in and he gets there a day early before the weigh-in, so he camps out there. I mean, that's something that's not normal for all of us, right? But pretty cool. And it's kind of specific to the state. Like I don't think there's any, even in Maine. I coached in Maine at one point. I don't think that you're taking dog sled teams to the state tournament, which by the way, isn't that interesting? Because Maddie Ripley also, she's a two-time state champion against boys for Maine. So it's ironic that I bring that up. But um, yeah,
What's
so
also
so
interesting
just
is you
the
bring
different
up the
stories.
Iditarod stuff. Dallas Seavey was a
Yes.
Greco-Roman cadet Greco-Roman champ or finalist, if I can remember. I think he was a Greco champ out there, and he's a multi-time Iditarod champion. Him and his family's just synonymous with sled dogs. So that's not again, if you've been around the sport, you can tie those together. But again, you're tying it together for the first time. You're like, really, sled dogs? Like you're gonna send somebody down the rabbit hole. They're gonna find the sled dog story, and then they're gonna find Dallas Seavey eventually. So you're gonna
Mhm.
tie it together. I love that. Second
Yeah.
state, my home state of Virginia. What do you got there?
Okay, so I mean, I just got to tell you, I mean, it's got to start with Grammy School Wrestling, right? So those guys are pretty legendary. Whether you want to say they're well, they're at least one of the first clubs, I guess you would say, in starting it, and just their family history. I think that for me, that's really important to know. So the stories, as you know in the book, they're either under chapters of attributes from of wrestling itself, or they're under chapters of age groups. But for me, I also tried to mix it up in terms of newer, older, more historic, or something maybe unknown. But I think it's I mentioned knowing about a strong wrestling community. For me, I think it's also knowing, like, someone from Virginia picks that up and says, wow, not only is there a strong wrestling community, I mean, there's a strong history and legacy here in the state. And so I thought that was important as well. Yeah.
And I think our new kid on the block, you mentioned this later in the book too, and this is something I covered in Fargo this year, was the rise of Mississippi, the last state to apparently I learned they did have wrestling sanctioned all these years. They just didn't have any teams. You mentioned Brian Fox in the book, and there's been it was a pretty cool story to see that singlet represented for the first time in Fargo this year. So Mississippi, they are way behind the eight ball. Arkansas's got about a 15-year jump on them. What did you learn about Mississippi that you're relaying here in Matt Return?
So I mean, I bring it out in the book, but for the longest time, we used to always say, "Oh, everybody but Mississippi has wrestling," right? And it's like now we can say that every state has wrestling, and on top of that, their state championship. I actually went to their state championships. So yeah, because a lot of this was travel. I wanted to see and do it with my own eyes. Uh, Unfortunately, you didn't bring up a state, Hawaii. I didn't get the invitation out there. So kidding
All right.
about
Well,
that.
I get to go there on vacation the day after the NCAA championships. I'm leaving Philly that morning to go connect with my wife and kids in Minneapolis. We're doing spring break in Hawaii, be our 15th year anniversary. Maybe I can do some recon for you, so you can like do
Yeah,
Matt Return 2
absolutely.
and be out there. I'd love to see a wrestling tournament in Hawaii. So you and I both are we haven't checked that box off yet. Not but
But
I've done features. I've seen Travis Lee out there. I've seen those things. They've got some guys.
oh yeah, they do. And once again, I think, another state that started, women pretty early, and so that's cool. But to get back to Mississippi, because I think is really important. Brian Fox has done a lot of great work. So he was my initial contact in the state of Mississippi, and I just think it's fantastic what they've been doing. One thing that's interesting to know is that they had wrestling. It was always on their books and their bylaws, and I never knew that. That's one thing that I learned, right? I just thought maybe if they had it, it was small and then went away, but it had always stuck in their bylaws. And then he found that and ran with it and started getting more and more clubs and teams and then schools involved and then having a state championship. I just think it's fantastic. And then the girls are growing just as rapidly as the boys in Mississippi. So the work that he's doing and his team are doing, and you mentioned Arkansas. My understanding is they did model a lot of their efforts after what Arkansas did and Greg Hatcher. So I just think it's fantastic that those states are going so strong, and Mississippi's really ramping up. I mean, even after I had gone to their first state championships, I had people saying, "Yeah, but not every state has it. Mississippi doesn't." I said, I don't mean to argue with you, but I've witnessed it, right? So
We've got it now. I mean,
yeah,
you go to Fargo, you've got kids from Guam coming, you've got kids from Puerto Rico coming, you've got kids that are at the DODDS schools in Europe coming. So the wrestling, the American wrestling is global as well as within our territories too. So that's a cool thing. We got all 50. I'm trying to think. Last time I went to Mississippi, I was about 12. So I've got no wrestling history down there, but I did know that when I think it was the Mississippi School for the Deaf has had a program for a very, very long time, or had a program for a very, very long time. When Jesuit coach Sam Harnsengram retired from Jesuit in New Orleans, it was a powerhouse down there, still is. I think he retired, and I think he started a program at Jackson High School in Mississippi for a bit, and then of course Ocean Springs has been kind of the beacon for the new revolution of Mississippi wrestling. So it's been there, which has been cool. And again, I like how you uncork that story in Matt Return, because even the old timers, you just talked about it. They'll be like, "Well, Mississippi, guess what? You're gonna learn something." So other things about the book that strike me as somebody I've not yet written a book. It's something that's Bill, why don't you write a book? I've got all these stories. I'm in the middle of a Gray Simons project at the Etched in Stone podcast series, and I get just stuck with this idea of it's got to be perfect. Paralysis by analysis. Like, it takes me so long to get something that I've got such a vested interest in to get out. How do you fight through that to be able to say, this is the finished product? I know there's probably a few things you go back and read through. You're like, I probably could have changed that. Probably could change that. Where do you get to a point and be like, this is the best finished product I'm going to get. If I nitpick it, it'll never get out. How do you fight through that?
it's difficult. I think the short answer is change your focus to something else that needs your attention and come back to it, right? So for me, it was some of the things that I had difficulty with were, okay, how many stories per state are going to be in there? You want it to be somewhat equitable as much as you can. Um, you want them to be under. I mean, obviously, when you look at good wrestling stories and people and clubs and things like that, so where do you place that story in terms of in the book? So the chapters that are about attributes of the sport of wrestling. Well, as you can imagine, many of these stories have multiple attributes. It could be in multiple chapters. So where am I placing it? So maybe I don't have two stories from the same state in the same chapter. Um, what For me, I'm a perfectionist, so it's really hard in terms of writing and then reading back through it and saying, why did I type that? Or why is this punctuation here? And that's a silly thing, but it drives me crazy. And I just had to rely on my editor to do it. And, to get different eyes on it is the best idea. You should never try to edit your own book because you will never see the mistakes. Even my SEC book, I read back through it a few years later and I said, how did I miss that? But reading your own words, it's hard to see your mistakes. So um, not trying to be perfect, but trying to do the best that I can with it, placing the chapters, verifying the stories with people. So when you write their story, I would send it back to them, one, for accuracy, and two, you want it to be um, a good representation of them. And so that was difficult. When you start talking about 100, 150 different stories, it's really closer to 150 to get in touch with all those people and then get them verified. on top of it. So there are some technical things there. You don't want to go too far into the weeds um, with the technical stuff in wrestling because, like we talked about, the new people coming to the sport. Yeah, you want to give them a base of knowledge, but you you don't want to give too much information right away and overwhelm them. So, just want to make sure that everything was technically sound. Of course, some things change once the book's published, right? More sports are that's one thing at the very end of it. There were 3 states that sanctioned the sport of women's wrestling after I had already completed it, had it edited. I had to go back through and redo that. So there's a lot of challenges. I think the way to overcome that is, like I mentioned earlier, is things that need your attention now. If you're really frustrated or hit a writer's block type of thing, change that over and give something else your attention. And as you mentioned, the book is not chronological, so it was easier for me to do that. So I could skip from chapter 8 to chapter 17 without a problem. And I could just take my mind off of what was frustrating or the roadblocks that I was having and work on that other thing.
Of the stories you said that, of the 150, is there one that probably fascinated you the most? That's like, wow, this is the one that goes like, this is the story why I am writing this book.
I oftentimes think about this because, I think there are a lot of good stories about men in this book. So I have a standalone chapter about female wrestling, but there are stories of females sprinkled throughout the book. But I bring that up because I think that, my favorite stories, I keep going back to the girls. Lily Luft has a great story, right? Um, Paige Mobley out of Ohio. There's all these great stories, in my opinion, and they don't all just fall on the women, but it seems like a lot of them. There's some just wonderful stories about these female wrestlers, but the one that stands out to me the most is Madison Newburn from Tennessee. The girl finds out that she has a brain tumor. They take her in. They have to do surgery. Obviously, it's serious surgery, and the only thing she can think about is getting back on the mat. The girl gets back on the mat with a headgear that gives her more protection, right? A shell. What are you doing getting back on the mat so soon? Why? Because she has a passion for the sport and loves the sport. The pain that she went through and the sacrifices she made to get back for the state tournament. And the wrestle. I mean, any of us and her parents, right? How strong are they, right? Any of us would just be happy that we're alive. Her parents are grateful she's alive. And what do they do when she, says she has a passion to get on the mat? They do everything in their power to help her get back on the mat. I can't say that I would be that strong. I would probably be fearing for my child's safety. And for them to be that strong and for her to get back on the mat, man, and she just lives with joy. I talked to her about her story and what she's happy. She loves wrestling. That's all she wanted. It wasn't she There was no pity party for having brain surgery and a brain tumor. It was I want to get back on the mat and I enjoy wrestling. And so not only is it a great story, but I think we can all just learn from her attitude as well.
Yeah, as a parent of a daughter who's had multiple brain surgeries, that's the type of story that just like catches you, hits you, and it's like, even though, like my 12-year-old daughter's been through a lot already, I'm like, there's learning, through the sport of that desire to get back in wrestling being the catalyst for it, or the vehicle for it. So that story just that blows you away. In terms of some of the funnier things, we're coming off an emotional high with Madison Newburn, but there's a lot of goofiness throughout here. You sprinkle that in. Wrestling is a sport it's inherently tough. It's grizzled. We like to have this like, it's you ain't tough enough to wrestle. You don't need to be out there. Blah blah blah. You get a lot of that old fuddy-duddy kind ofness with it, but we like to have fun too. There's goofiness that goes about. What was one of the funner stories that you came across that you're like, this has to go in?
So I was at a club in West Virginia, and I never really told parents, who I was, unless maybe a coach said this is a good story or you should talk with them, just because you know how parents are, right? Some parents they're gonna be like, well, you should write about this, and you should write, or even embellish this. So I just never told people that. So a lady came up to me at one point, hadn't seen me at the club before, and just asked, "Hey, who's your son out there?" No, I'm just here observing, thinking about getting into coaching. So what about you? Who do you have out there? So her son at the time was a 5-year-old boy. He was about a month and a half into it. What happened was when they first went, he saw the older boys doing pull-ups after practice. So he wanted to do that. So he asked the coach, "Hey, can you help me do these pull-ups? Come give me, I want to do that." So he couldn't do one on his own. The coaches assisted him. But every day after practice, the little boy kept going to the coaches, "Hey, it's time for me to do it too." Well, eventually, he did one on his own. And at the time I was there, I think he was up to 3. But he did one on his own. His mom said the very night that he did the one on his own, he went home and he's flexing all around the house, and she said, as a matter of fact, every time he meets someone new, he flexes. It's funny. Well, I had forgotten she told me that, but I asked her if she would introduce me, if I could ask him some questions. She said, "Sure." So when practice ended, he comes running up. She introduces me, and the first I put my hand out to shake his hand. No, he wasn't shaking my hand. He flexed on me. So 5-year-old boy flexing on me after wrestling practice. So I thought that was pretty funny.
I got nothing for that one because it's just kids, like you said back with your initial book, kids say the darndest things. Kids, now you're writing it down so you remember it. Kids doing the crazy things on the Flex It. Now, I'm going to cut over to this. So to get let's make sure my screen is up so you're not seeing it. Okay, there we go. We got that up. So to get the book, again, the best way, as you said, on Amazon right here. So you can get it on Amazon. Your other books are out there too. If you search Matt Return, and Ron Lang, so the resurgence of amateur wrestling in the United States, we see it there. Now, that's one thing you also talk about early is the resurgence, and 2013 is for wrestling people. I mean, we're talking February 2013. I remember waking up. We had just moved back to Minnesota from Colorado. I had previously worked at USA Wrestling, and I don't even remember, it was missed calls, missed text messages everywhere about the sport being dropped from the Olympic Games. Fast forward to September, we get it back. The sport has been changed. We got out of the dark ages of international wrestling. But that is a prevailing theme in setting the stage for this book. So what do you remember about 2013, and why does that play such a prominent role in kind of the undercurrent, the telling of the Matt Return story here?
I mean, it wasn't as severe as, say, 9/11, but for me, it was one of those things that you remember where you were stunned, you were dumbfounded. Like, to me, it just did not make common sense, right? I mean, this is the grandfather of Olympic sports. I mean, why, what's happening here? That's what I mean. Still in my mind today, what happened there? Now, as you and I know as adults, probably, like with so many other things in sports, I mean, like NIL and college sports and all that. Now, where you follow the money, right? But it was dumbfounding. My brother, who was big into wrestling, went to Purdue. Um, we talked about. I had friends calling. I mean, it was it was like a support group, to be honest with you. Like,
Well
at
put,
first,
Jeff.
yeah,
Definitely.
at first it was like, what's happening? Why is it happening? And what do we need to do? But it was like, and I hate to bring up a tragedy, like a 9/11 or something, but it really was like, you've got bashed over the head, and you're just not thinking clearly. What is going on here? And we had to really straighten out our minds through talking with each other and figure out, okay, well, how do we combat this? Because this doesn't make sense to us, right? It just doesn't make sense. So, I mean, it's like if you were to buy a new car and then all of a sudden it won't go into gear. Wait a second, I don't understand here. And so we were a support group for each other, and it just just don't forget where I was at the time. So,
I think it was 8 something in the morning. I remember like because my again now 12-year-old daughter was still. I mean, she was. I'm trying to think. August, yeah, 8 months old. I'm doing math on my fingers here for those wondering what that was. I'm not flexing on anybody, but yeah, I remember it. And then there's a couple moments like that. I remember I was in the middle of a show, the Rudis podcast with Matt Dernlin, when I got a text on the screen here. Doing a show like we are now, recording the video, and I got a text that Old Dominion was dropping its wrestling program in the middle of a show. Like I remember exactly where I was when it happened and its impact on me. And again, like a support group, we had a smaller support group kind of thing going on there, but this was like the global wrestling community. So again, so that's where the you've got the term resurgence. The title, the resurgence. Why did you use the word resurgence here?
because I think that wrestling was stronger at some point, and I think that we had a dip in the popularity of it, maybe even in talent. A lot of people take it as talent, right? But I feel like when I think back about Gabe, there was kind of a how would you say it? I mean, obviously he wasn't as popular as the Beatles or Elvis or someone like that, but he was very well known, and he brought a lot of attention to the sport. I think that it waned a little bit. I think, and I even allude to it in the book. I mean, you start losing programs as well, college programs. Um, I think that there is a resurgence. I think that people are starting to say, yes, wrestling is strong. It's not an afterthought that we're just going to cut to get our quotas to take follow through with Title IX. I think that everybody is starting to see the strength of the sport, what it can do. But that's another thing I say resurgence because I think our communities that are involved in wrestling, people that get involved in wrestling, understand the strength of the sport, what it can do for you personally. And so I think there's a resurgence in that as well. But to start seeing women's sports or women's wrestling, excuse me, become so popular, strengthening the sport, to see college programs, you know, even if they're smaller divisions, you know, I don't think that that's an issue. Yes, do we want the bigger schools to have it? Obviously, yes, but I mean, I think it's nice to have stronger numbers. We're having more and more people coming back to the sport. Like for me, for instance, I mean, I'm nothing great. I don't mean it like that. I'm just saying, people that were involved with wrestling, and I've talked with a lot of them over the years, and especially the last few years, that were wrestlers, maybe were coaches, things like that, are coming back to helping clubs, coming back starting teams and at the high school level, similar to what I've done. And it's like I just see that to me was the perfect word because I feel like there was always a strength there. There was always something, simmering under the surface. But I think that we're uncovering that now and getting stronger. And I think we're going to surpass any levels that we'd ever been before. But it's just something that also kind of ties into my whole purpose of the book. And that is to let people know that there is strong wrestling all over the country. There's opportunities. And if you get in this sport, it'll change your life. So it's resurging, and I just, for me it was a strong word that hopefully people see it and say that's something good that I at least need to check out.
You alluded to it here at the very end in terms about how your return from wrestling. We didn't lead with this, but we're going to come back to it because it's part of the book is your own, I guess, reorigin, your own resurgence into wrestling. Is let's explain the gap from wrestling growing up to coming back into it and how you had to wrestle a gargantuan individual in the process to rediscover that love for the sport.
Oh yeah. So the funniest part about this, it seems like when I look back at my life, I'm kind of always coming back to wrestling, right? So just quickly, I wrestled junior high, high school, went to the University of Kentucky. Then I wrestled in the Bluegrass State Games a few years into college, so I'm coming back to wrestling there. Go off and coach college, high school football. Come back to wrestling, starting couple programs, right? Um, Now doing some private business. Then I come back to wrestling now, writing a book. So it seems like that's kind of been my pattern. Uh, excuse me. I'm so involved with football and college football and recruiting and things like that. But that's been my pattern. But to what you mentioned, so I'm at the University of Kentucky, and the state of Kentucky has bluegrass games. So it's the quote unquote state Olympics for Kentucky. And so I said, you know what, I want to enter this wrestling tournament. And I said, I'm not, I mean, I'm going to work out, try to make sure I have my wind and all that, but I'm not cutting. I'm not, whatever I step on the scale, I'm wrestling. So I could be wrong on the numbers, but I'm pretty sure, I think it was the weight classes were 220 and then unlimited. So I step on the
Yes,
scale, I'm
a
226.
throwback to the Chris Taylor, Tab Thacker era for sure.
Well, and that is, I mean, so I step on the scale at 226. And one of my proudest achievements in wrestling was the semifinals match. I wrestled a former Marine, and we battled, but it was probably one of the most fun times I had too. Right? You get in those scraps, and win or lose, you're like beating on each other, and each person's having success, and you have some challenges that you have to overcome in a match. That was probably one of my favorite matches that I've ever wrestled. I was fortunate enough to come out on top. So in the finals, I get this guy, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but
It
I mean,
definitely wasn't Farmer Burns, though. But
no, no, but he was. So my understanding, he was the Kentucky State University wrestling coach, but the guy was 400 pounds. I mean, and I was told by many people that was underestimating it. So I doubt he weighed in, right? Um, so here, but here's how dumb
two
and
scales, 1 foot on each.
yes. Here's how dumb and naive I was. I'm thinking this big old boy can't move. I can get in, get a leg, and get out before he can sprawl. So I'm trying to sweep the ankle, and
Now,
he just
how old are you at this point? How
I'm
old are you?
probably 21 or 22.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So it just only been a couple years. You were still in relatively close to fighting shape.
oh yeah. So
Okay.
so actually it's probably closer to 20 because I graduated high school at age 17. So I was only a couple years into college when I did this. Plus the ego, and I'm thinking, hey, this guy, I can sweep around, pick this guy's ankle up. Well, he laid on top of me, and honestly, I just couldn't move. I mean, I wasn't hurting, I wasn't out of breath, but once he flipped me over and he laid on me, I was out of breath. Like he basically choked me out,
This
and
sucks.
and, but the funniest part of this, and I think a lot of people can relate to it, is so a couple of my roommates from Kentucky. So one that actually wrestled at Indiana and then transferred to be a kicker at Kentucky was one of my roommates, and him and one of my other roommates show up to watch me. Of course, they're having a good time and having some beverages, and they're just razzing the heck out of me. And it's like, so not only did I get whooped and make a dumb mistake, and now these guys are razzing me the whole time. But it's a good memory. So
And then when the guy picked you up after you got beat, he flexed on you, right? Is that what he
we should have. He should have.
did? Ron Lang with Matt Return. Once again, we'll cut over to the screen one more time. You got it there. Amazon.com is where you can find him. Matt Return, Ron Lang. His socials are right there up on the screen for you for those watching. For those listening, it's Instagram at the.coachlang or on X, formerly known as Twitter, at the Coach Lang. And as in the time we got left, just a little bit like, what is your day-to-day life? You're into this scouting, this college football world, which is crazy right now. I'm keeping an eye on it. I follow, the Yahoo Sports, Pat 40, Ross Dellinger, and all those guys. And then, of course, there's now all this litigation out there. A guy professor up at Boise State has started the college sports litigation tracker. I had a COVID tracker of lost programs back then. I've got one that's going to be potentially coming with the drop programs during the House NIL era. So how this era, let's take this away from wrestling and just talk about, the busyness of your day-to-day life and how all this stuff is impacting the football recruiting side, because that's where a lot of the ire is coming from Olympic sports, is this is football and basketball based. What does this impact for you trying to help kids get placed in college and things like that?
Oh, it's a huge impact. And just to be honest with you, just the last couple of months have flipped on its head. It seems like recruiting has flipped on its head, then flipped on its head again, and then flipped on its head again. I mean, we have that the JUCO ruling, right? So the quarterback from Vanderbilt, he was granted an extra year of
Wrestler, by the
eligibility.
way.
I'm sorry.
A wrestler, by the way, New Mexico
Yeah,
State
well,
champion back in
actually,
the
check
day.
that out. So when they upset Alabama, um, who was it? Was it RBY that was right there on
No,
the
Real
field with
Woods.
him?
Real Woods was down there.
Oh, Real Woods. There you go. I don't know why I was thinking RBY, but yeah. So, yeah, he's on the field with him, and I'm like, okay, representing wrestling. I like that. But so what that's done though is so now the NCAA, as we know, knee jerk reaction. Following day or 2 days later, they said, oh, all the JUCO eligibility. You go to JUCO, and that's not going to count against your eligibility. Well, of course that yeah, that gets walked back. The truth of the matter is, it's only those right now that are in JUCO that's not. So there, things are ever changing, and I think the problem for me is, or for a lot of people, well, number one, the NCAA doesn't really think things through and put proper guardrails up, right? I mean, some are
Everybody's been
good.
asking for guardrails. Plus, not to mention, if you listen to this show, we're recording on February 7th. If you listen to this show February 10th, this answer might be completely different because the question's probably been changed.
It
And so
will
is
be
the ruling.
different. What concerns me the most about it, and I hope this doesn't get to wrestling, but what concerns me the most about when you start talking about NIL, transfer portal, JUCO ruling, house settlement, all these things, what it's doing is it's suppressing the high school student athletes. They're not getting recruited as much or properly. And I just, they're the transfer portal's all good and all that. But the funny thing is when you look at it, how many guys flame out? How many transfer portal guys don't work? Oh, well, he went to Georgia. He's transferring. You know he's got to be good. Well, the truth of the matter is there's always a reason that somebody's in the transfer portal. And sometimes it might be because the coaches figured out they couldn't play it like they thought they could. And I'm not trying to run anybody down, but there's always a reason for the transfer portal.
Well, and you being in the recruiting and scouting game, you alluded to it as going back through with these stories. You've got to fact check. You've got to verify. You're not just going to take a coach's word. Yeah, he ran for X amount of yards, this many things. I mean, even if the internet padding stats and embellishing is a thing, so I can only imagine the type of stuff that comes across your desk on the football side of things. Like there's we got our wrestling recruiting experts out there that see a lot of stuff and pay a lot of attention, but with football, just the sheer volume. That's got to be a time in itself on how to just like, all right, we got to vet this kid. They got to vet this coach. You got to say, are they bound for last chance U, or are they bound for, are they bound for Bama?
And I think this relates to wrestling. One thing I do want to pass on for any young people that are watching this, or even parents, when you send now football's different, right? Football, it starts and probably ends with the film, right? Like they want to see you on film. You can say your size, you can say all your achievements, but they need to see your film. Uh, One thing I'm always advising people, and I think that wrestlers and parents can utilize this too, is you can say whatever you want, and you can put a film together of you getting your hand raised, or you scoring a touchdown, you hitting a splado, or getting a interception. But really, what coaches want to see are your skills. So you mentioned like stats, right? Don't make your film or don't make your athletic resume so much about stats. Make it more about your skills, right? And now the stats that are imperative are, especially in football, are GPA, height, weight, maybe 40 time. There's some things there, but honestly, I can get a sack as a defensive end and it doesn't show any skill, right? The tackle blocked the wrong way. I went free and I tackled the quarterback. That doesn't show a whole lot of skill, right? But if I fight through a double team, I chase the quarterback out of the pocket, I eventually catch him, and that shows some skills. So just what I wanted to do is just pass on. When you're in the recruiting game, it's more imperative to show your skills than stats. So just show coaches your skills and then develop relationships with them.
And one thing on the wrestling side that I can't remember who told me this about, this is about film too, is don't send me your highlights. I want to see some of your losses. I want to see how you respond to it. Because wrestling, you're going to lose. except for
Yep.
Kale. You're gonna lose. It's gonna happen. Like you're not gonna go through your if you're trying to wrestle in college, you're not gonna go through your career in the modern era without a loss. I mean, it's just the statistical possibilities are very, very minuscule. So how do you respond to a loss? That's the one thing I think I heard a coach tell me years ago. Well, I know I heard a coach, I just can't remember who it was. Is like, okay, you've got here's your inside trip, here's your flash. Show me your gritty 2-1 tiebreaker win, or show me your gritty 2-1 tiebreaker loss and how you responded afterwards. Those are the, I don't have a whole lot to do with recruiting and helping coaches and kids get to colleges these days as much as I used to. But that was also one bit of information that I always found very helpful when talking to a new parent. So we're getting off on the recruiting side a little bit. That's another conversation we could have another hour on. But right now, again, Ron Lang at the.Coach Lang on Instagram, at the Coach Lang on X, Amazon.com, search Matt Return, Ron Lang. Any final words that we've got for you about the book, Ron? Again, I enjoyed it. And my last pitch for the listeners is, again, don't think you know more than this book. I get a ton of content. I know a lot about a lot of levels of wrestling. I learned something from this. This is a book that's not just going to go on my shelf. I'm not going to reference anymore. This is one that's the coffee table book. This is one that sits on the bar. This sits, next to the dumper in a bathroom. You can sit there and pick something up from it every time you read it. So that's my pitch. Ron, what's your last pitch for it?
Well, I think it's very similar, right? I mean, so it's not technique, it's not motivation, it's not a journal, it's entertainment, and it's wrestling centric, right? And not only that, I do think that you can learn from it. I think you can be motivated from it. There's so many good stories, and my favorite part of the book, and I guess that's probably the best pitch anybody can give, right? What do you personally feel
Right.
passionate about? And what I personally feel passionate about are the people. I mean, that's what makes really anything in this world special are the people and their stories. To have 150 stories about different people. So, I mean, like the back of the jacket says, what you read, you're going to get a little inside peek into from Olympic champions all the way down, right? I mean, you see Burrow's picture there. I want to name drop someone else though that I was really excited to have, and that's Lee Kemp. So I was able to speak with Lee Kemp and have him part of the book too. I mean, there's so many great people and stories, and they're not all celebrities or known people in the game. Uh, but I mean, there's great programs out there to read about how they start a program. How about a great name like Grit and Gratitude Wrestling Club? I mean, there's a lot of good stuff out there. We talk about research. What about Georgia? What about what Georgia's doing on the high school wrestling scene? I mean, people are going to find out a lot. There's a lot of information, like you said, that you're probably not going to know. Maybe you have an idea of, but you're going to get some specifics in some stories. You're going to learn about a Maddie Newburn, right? You're going to learn Lily Luff's story if you don't know it. I mean, I encourage you to read that. That's one of the longer ones. It's really kind of 3 stories in one. But the other thing about it is, like, I mean, it's just you can pick it up and put it down without missing a beat. You can be at a wrestling tournament. I mean, these are short stories, a couple paragraphs at a time. In between matches, pick one up in the chapter that you find what you're needing, an attribute of wrestling. So, is it courage? Okay, let me read a story out of that chapter, and I'll be ready for my next match. But at the end of the day, it is about it's hard to encompass everything that wrestling does for people, but there's a lot of great stories, and they're all true stories of real people, and that's what makes things beautiful. They're people's true stories.
Ron Lang, appreciate the time, man. Sorry it took me so long to finish this thing, but I tell you, it was well worth it. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate all that you do, and thank you for having me on here. This is about promoting the sport, and so all you club coaches out there and you high school coaches, you have people that are interested in the sport, or you've had difficulty talking with their parents. Honestly, you can give them this book and say, read any chapter out of this book and tell me why you would not try wrestling. I mean, once you read it yourself, I think that all you coaches, you'll understand what I'm saying. There's no answer to this. Like we were talking earlier, it doesn't make sense we wouldn't have wrestling in the Olympics. Well, read this book and tell me how it makes sense that you wouldn't try wrestling. So that's what I encourage people to do is pick up a copy or even read some of it online and see what you think. But I believe that you'll be intrigued by it. There's also some works that I've done. I guess you would call them poems. Um, just out of my passion for wrestling. There's one about female wrestling, and there's a few different ones, but the one at the very end of the book is called Essence of Wrestling. And I've been working with some people on this. I think it would be great for us at the NCAA championships to have a one shining moment like we do in basketball.
Hmm.
I think so. I've been working on putting some music to this, and hopefully, maybe it can be one shining moment for wrestling.
One shining moment. If during championship season, I see it from all the SIDs everywhere, all over the place. So, well, yeah, I like the essence of wrestling. Let's see if we can make that happen. Ron, appreciate the time. Thanks again, man.
Thank you, Jason. Take care, bud.